air and sea search is continuing for possible survivors of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a 729-foot ore carrier, which apparently broke apart and sunk.
An air and sea search is underway for potential survivors of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a 729-foot ore ship which reportedly disintegrated and sank during the night on Lake Superior. The vessel and its 29-man crew disappeared during the height of a raging storm, with winds up to 80 miles per hour and waves reaching as high as 25 feet. For almost 5 decades, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald has lain quietly at the bottom of Lake Superior's icy black waters. During a November night in 1975 when a live storm raged outside, it vanished without the slightest distress call, with all 29 of its crew on board helping to meet their untimely demise. Rumors spread like fire. Songs were composed. Theories were prevalent. But still, the lake, just like the wreck itself, would not spill its secrets. But now, a high-tech underwater drone with high-definition cameras and AI sensors has finally ventured where no human diver ever had. And when the video returned, what was seen was heart-wrenching. The wreck was completely shredded and mangled, a tangled cemetery of metal that resembled no man's land rather than a ship. No one knew exactly how bad the damage was between the two huge sections until now. What the drone caught amazed engineers, silenced critics, and shook even seasoned investigators. This wasn't a shipwreck. This was worse. The video at last showed what occurred that evening. But the most chilling aspect wasn't what the drone captured, it was what the evidence uncovered about human failure. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was the American side's pride. It was not another freighter. When it was launched on June 8, 1958, it was the biggest boat ever to cross the Great Lakes of North America. The Fitzgerald stood at 729 feet in length, 75 feet wide, and loomed 39 feet from keel to deck, being longer than 2 football fields placed end to end. Its 26,000-ton cargo capacity allowed for one journey to deliver enough iron ore to construct a whole skyscraper. Aside from its size, it had some of the most technologically advanced engineering of the time, radar equipment, twin diesel engines with tremendous power, and computer-controlled cargo hold systems. It was designed to move in blizzards, and slice through icy seas without problem. It was pretty much considered unsinkable by many. Why were so many so sure of this, however? And what was forgotten that led to this notion being broken forever? Commissioned by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company as an investment purchase and rented to the Oglebay Norton Corporation for use, the Fitzgerald soon became the public face of Great Lakes shipping. Executives at the company took pride in what it stood for: speed, dependability, and sheer industrial muscle. The ship transported taconite pellets from Duluth, Minnesota's mines, down Lake Superior to industrial ports such as Detroit and Toledo, powering America's post-war need for steel. In contrast to most freighters of its era, the Fitzgerald had a lavish crew lounge, a cutting-edge galley, and even a steward who waited on visitors. NWM's VIPs frequently traveled on it, taking their families along, converting ordinary shipping voyages into corporate vacations afloat. Kids visited the ship on field trips to school. Longshoremen stopped just to observe it loading and unloading. News vendors wrote its record-breaking hauls into headlines. Among mariners, it earned a reputation for its speed, for its being in and out early, and for cutting through tough seas with hardly a shudder. But beneath its proud reputation were dire hidden issues. Its huge cargo hatches had to be closed by hand, 2 men and hours of hard work to screw them tight. It had no flood detectors in the holds, no alarms to warn the crew of water coming in. Safety amenities were few for its size and stature. If a leak initiated deep in the vessel, who would notice? If a wave broke over the railing, what notice would the crew get? The appalling response was, none. Yet few doubted it. The Fitzgerald had ridden out storms previously, some almost as intense, so why not again? Faith in its size and capability had taken the place of actual safety modifications. Captain Ernest McSorley, who became commandant in 1972, was one of the most esteemed seamen on the Great Lakes. Having sailed for more than 40 years, as well as served on smaller and more delicate ships, McSorley knew the lakes like the back of his hand. Cool under stress and respected for his discipline, he had his crew's trust. Under his command, they felt safe. Fitzgerald had not had any serious accidents during its 17-year lifespan. There had never been any serious structural malfunctions reported. By the 1970s, the Fitzgerald was more than a ship, it was a floating emblem of American industrial power. But symbols, however imposing, are still subject to the realities that they were constructed to defy. The Fitzgerald's last voyage started like many others, without forethought that it would end in tragedy. On the chilly afternoon of November 9, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald left the Burlington Northern Dock in Superior, Wisconsin. Its load, more than 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore destined for Detroit steel mills. The conditions were hazardous but not ominous. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, was to depart in close follow as a backup vessel. Bigger, faster, and veterans on this run, the Fitzgerald had traveled through Lake Superior thousands of times. Everybody thought that this voyage was going to be just as routine. But by the morning hours of November 10, the weather pattern had turned into a raging tempest. The National Weather Service put out warnings, but by then it was too late. Winds howled at the lake at 75 miles per hour. Temperatures dipped below freezing. Rogue waves climbed over 25 feet. Lake Superior's surface was a black wall of pandemonium. Sleet sheeted over the deck, and visibility was reduced to zero. At some point in the morning, the Fitzgerald's radar went out. Blind now, Captain McSorley was forced to depend entirely on the Anderson for navigation, a formidable challenge given the harsh conditions. At 3:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald was damaged. Vent covers were ripped loose, and water was entering. McSorley's tone was calm, but beneath it a tension. Something was amiss, and getting worse in a hurry. By 4:10 p.m., the Fitzgerald was listing badly. Both radar setups had vanished. The vessel was steering blind, without warning systems, and perhaps without management of the flooding. From his position in the Anderson, Captain Cooper caught occasional views of the Fitzgerald riding perilously low. Every wave lifted it, then crashed down. The bow was going deep into the lake, suffering terrible pounding. At night, waves became erratic, pounding from every side. Icy spray covered the ship. If the Fitzgerald was underwater flooding, no one could know it. Without alarms and without access to check, the fact was concealed from the crew. Then came the last message. At 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley's voice came crackling over the radio, "We are holding our own." 5 minutes later, the Fitzgerald disappeared from radar. No distress call. No flare. No beacon. It was there, and then it wasn't there anymore. The Anderson tried to call. No one picked up. They swept the storm, but there were no lights, no wreckage, only ice, wind, and night. It was as if the Fitzgerald had been swallowed whole. The 29 men had all disappeared without the opportunity to bid them farewell. For decades, what occurred during those last 5 minutes was mere speculation. No one survived to testify. No camera captured it. But almost 50 years later, new technology would finally return to the wreckage. Fitted with AI-augmented sonar and deep-penetrating sensors, an underwater drone returned to the coordinates where the Fitzgerald disappeared. What it captured in that depths was more than wreckage, it was proof. Proof that uncovered secrets no one anticipated, and which were almost too awful to imagine. By the time anyone might have heard the walls buckling or the hull creaking, it was already too late to save a single life. They believed they were surviving right up until the moment the lake pulled them under. And what the drone exposed next proved that the Fitzgerald was not alone. The silent threat that took the Fitzgerald had been hiding in other ships, too. The larger horror, why experts remain afraid. What sent experts into a horror of disgust over the destruction of the Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't the individual failure of a single ship. It was the fact that numerous other ships of the same age were constructed with the same quiet defects. The drone mission highlighted one wreck perhaps, but what it really revealed was a general shipping maritime failure that continued for decades of shipping on the Great Lakes. Investigators established that the clamp systems holding the Fitzgerald's cargo hatches in place were not unique. They were run-of-the-mill on scores of freighters constructed during the 1950s and early 1970s. They had no redundancy inside. If one of the clamps malfunctioned in bad weather, nothing else would be between the freezing lake and the open hold. Water would seep in undetected, accumulating weight, sinking the ship from within. It wouldn't even take a breach or an explosion. It would simply require time. The drone crew had anticipated discovering evidence of violent damage. They discovered instead decades of compromises in the design. Most freighters of the era had no internal flood detection system whatsoever. There were no alarms inside the cargo bay. There were no ballast controls with a degree of automation that could rebalance the vessel as water entered its compartments. Practically speaking, the instant water began to enter where it shouldn't, the crew didn't even know. By the time indications arose on the surface, the vessel had already lost the battle. What unsettled naval engineers most was the way normalized this weakness had been. Historical records showed shipping corporations had campaigned against comprehensive safety improvements for years. Internal memoranda expressed both cost and time concerns. Hatch system upgrades and installing sensor arrays would have taken months out of dry dock. That was lost revenue. Ships were more profitable when moving cargo than idle in the docks being repaired to be safe. Retired inspectors had acknowledged that certain design risks were deemed tolerable. It was known that in rough weather, the weaknesses would be exposed, but few thought a ship the size of the Fitzgerald could really be rolled under. Yet in the words of the phrase many engineers muttered after watching the drone video were matter-of-fact and gruesome. Any hatch was a coin flip. Any trip, no matter how mundane, had the potential for disaster. What the drone could not record. 29 men perished when the Edmund Fitzgerald sank out of sight. Not one body was ever found. The lake provided no remains and no final words other than Surly's last transmission. For the families, the silence was total. The wreck was a grave and the water lapped over it without hint for decades. In 1995, a deep-sea recovery operation recovered the Fitzgerald's bell from the wreck. It was the only significant artifact recovered. A replacement bell was installed on site out of respect for the crew. The original bell is exhibited at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitefish Point, Michigan. Each year on November 10 at the memorial ceremony, the bell is tolled 29 times, one for each of the men who perished on board the ship. It is then tolled a 30th time for all sailors lost. The tradition is exact, reverent, and observed by families, sailors, and survivors.